Hi everyone, this is Carolyn Thompson, reporter with the Windsor Star. I'm here in the Windsor Star News Cafe with provincial NDP leader Andrea Horwath. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Carolyn.
So first, can you tell us what brought you to Windsor today?
Well, today I started my day in Tecumseh, actually, with Mayor McNamara talking about the Bondwell plant that had the fire last week, getting an update on the situation, getting a sense of what had happened and how the community moves forward.
And I want to talk to you about the cabinet members that have just been announced recently for the 3 MPPs that we have within the NDP in our ridings, in our region. So can you tell me about that? Why did you choose the positions that you did for those?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I guess the longer-standing incumbent, if you will, Taras Natashak, has been a Labour critic in the previous government, the previous legislature, I guess I should say, Parliament, and he's done a very good job for us on that file. This is a community; these are communities, frankly, in this region that have a strong Labour presence. Taras himself is a person who comes out of the Labour movement, and so he is an excellent representative for that file. Percy Hatfield is someone who, frankly, has told me that he has an interest in the environment, and so I gave him that file because he is interested in that file. Percy is somebody who is very diligent and has a great capacity in terms of making sure that he's doing the research, staying on top of the issues. He's no slouch, let's put it that way, when it comes to difficult issues and intense files. He's got that research from his work in the media, that research skill or capacity, and so I felt very comfortable giving him an important him an important role as a critic for environment. But he also is my critic for infrastructure. And again, this region's got some pretty serious infrastructure projects that are underway with the Parkway and the DRIC and all of those things. And so it's important to have somebody who is able to know what's happening at the local level on important files like that. And so that's why he has infrastructure. Lisa is a woman who understands organizations and structures of public service coming from the school board, frankly, and her trustee role there. And I thought that corrections and community service, community correctional services, community safety and correctional services, that's it. That one changes from time to time, that ministry. But I thought that not only would she have the capacity to be able to deal with that file, but I also know Southwestern Ontario particularly, as well as other parts of Ontario, but the Southwest has had issues around closure of smaller jails, the consolidation into the larger jail, issues around violence and problems that are occurring in corrections facilities, and so I thought this would be a good file for Teresa or for Lisa to be able to hang on to. So those are my rationales. What do you think?
Well, a couple of follow-up questions. So when we're talking about infrastructure, now the NDP brought down the Liberal government because of the budget, which one of the things that we reported was an opposition to the infrastructure funding that was in there. So now that that budget is back in force because the Liberal has gotten a majority, how are you moving forward knowing that there are things that have passed that initially you opposed and brought down the government for?
Well, I don't know that that infrastructure funding was particularly problematic for us. I mean, we had a similar commitment to infrastructure funding in our plan. What's problematic for us in that budget, though, is the sell-off of public assets. And so in that budget that the Liberals claim is progressive, we find a lot of things that are not very progressive at all. That's why we've been calling it a Trojan horse budget, because frankly, you scratch the surface of some of these ideas that the Liberals put forward as progressive, and you see things like the sell-off of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. You see a sell-off of Hydro One, possibly the OPG, possibly. We see a wholesale sell-off LCBO, possibly. We don't know what the government's planning on selling off in terms of our public assets, and that's a bad thing to do. We saw what happened with the 407 highway when that got sold off. It was the wrong move for Ontario. There's also in that budget hidden cuts. Even the government's own, or the Liberals' own hand-picked, analyst, Don Drummond, recently said that the way he looks at that budget is very clear to him that there's about 100,000 job cuts hidden in the out years of that budget. And so this is something people didn't vote for. They didn't vote for austerity. In fact, they voted, I believe, loudly against a plan to cut 100,000 jobs, and yet that's exactly what's buried in the Liberal budget. And so that's why we didn't support it from day one, and that's why we couldn't support it just the other day in the legislature.
Now that said, people did vote for a Liberal majority, and in Windsor we have lost a Liberal cabinet member. So what does that mean? How are you going to actually make sure that the Windsor voices are heard, knowing that you are no longer in the power that you were prior to the election?
Well, I mean, I think New Democrats have proven time and time again to the people of the Windsor area, their general region, if you will, that our voices have been very effective in terms of getting action for the people of this community. I mean, I think about the potential of the end of the thoracic surgery at the hospital, and it was Taras Natashak who rose up and fought against that. The Liberal MPP at the time didn't say much at all about that potential loss of healthcare services from the hospital. New Democrats aren't afraid to be loud and to be vocal and to stand up for what's right and what's important for people in their communities. And so I have all confidence that the people of Windsor, whether it's Windsor West, whether it's Windsor-Tecumseh, whether it's Essex, Windsor-Essex, I believe, I have all confidence, and I believe firmly that that they're going to be very, very well represented by 3 strong New Democrats.
And prior to the election, you had campaigned about your support for the auto industry. So just tell me a little bit about how you plan to do that now with the position that you're in.
Well, you know, it was shocking, I think, to all of us to hear the other opposition leader prior to the election campaign refer to auto sector incentives as corporate welfare. That's irresponsible, and frankly, it's uninformed. I mean, everybody knows that in order to attract that investment and attract those jobs, frankly, you have to be at the table in a worldwide competition that requires governments to participate with these companies in terms of potential investment. So my job now is to make sure that we continue to support these kinds of initiatives, and B, encourage the government to make commitments to get that investment here. Not only do we know that those jobs create a good standard of living for the people who work directly in the auto industry, but we also know there are a number of spin-off jobs and spin-off economic impacts that are unmeasurable, really, when it comes to the impact on communities. And we see what happens when those jobs go, right? As those jobs leave communities, we see what happens in terms of layoffs, in terms of reduced standard of living for families who can't then get a job to replace those jobs that are lost, that provide the same kind of income and the same kind of benefits, and that's not the right direction for Ontario.
All right, thanks very much. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I was just glad to be back in Windsor.
All right, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.